Morning sunlight poured through the tall glass walls of Barton & Cole Enterprises, bouncing off the marble floor and chrome pillars like a mirror of perfection. The lobby buzzed with the rhythm of success, the sound of clicking heels, echoing phones, and rushed voices of people chasing meetings and dreams. Everyone looked sharp, every face spoke of ambition, every move screamed purpose. But then, through those glass doors, walked a man who didn't fit the picture. He was tall, calm, and carried himself with quiet confidence. His clothes were simple, a white shirt neatly pressed, sleeves rolled up, dark trousers, and a well-worn leather folder tucked under his arm. No expensive watch, no polished briefcase, no aura of someone trying to impress. Just a calm presence that somehow commanded attention without asking for it. His name was Daniel Carter, but no one in that lobby knew who he was, and that was about to make all the difference. Behind the reception desk sat Amanda, a young woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She looked up from her computer, her gaze landing on Daniel. Her eyebrows lifted, just slightly, before she leaned toward her coworker with a smirk. "Lost one already," she whispered, just loud enough for the nearby clients to hear. The coworker snickered. Daniel, hearing it, said nothing. He simply approached the desk with quiet dignity. "Good morning," he said softly, his tone calm, almost disarming. "I have a meeting scheduled with Mr. Reynolds." Amanda blinked, pretending to search her computer, even though she wasn't typing anything at all. "Oh really?" she said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "And you are delivering what exactly?" A few heads in the lobby turned toward them. Daniel looked at her, his eyes kind but steady. "I'm not here for a delivery," he replied. "Just a meeting." Amanda's smile widened. It wasn't a kind one. "Well," she said slowly, "our meetings usually require an appointment and appropriate attire." Her eyes slid over his clothes, judging every inch. The words hung heavy in the air, and the silence that followed felt louder than any laughter. One of the clients waiting nearby shifted uncomfortably, sensing the insult but saying nothing. That was the kind of silence Daniel knew too well. The silence that follows when people see injustice but don't want to get involved. He'd heard it before, in boardrooms, in restaurants, even in interviews where his qualifications outshone everyone else's, but his skin color made people hesitate. Yet Daniel never lost his composure. He offered a faint smile and said, "Don't worry, I won't take much of your time." Amanda chuckled. "Oh, I'm sure you won't," she said mockingly, then gestured toward the seating area. "You can wait right there while I verify your meeting." The way she said it, dripping with disbelief, made her meaning clear. Daniel nodded politely and walked to the nearby bench. He sat down, crossing one leg over the other, folding his hands over the folder in his lap. He looked like a man at peace, but inside, there was something simmering, something powerful yet controlled. As he waited, Amanda leaned back in her chair and began whispering again to her coworker, their laughter echoing through the lobby. The security guard at the door gave Daniel a hesitant glance, unsure whether he should step in or stay silent. Everyone could feel it, the awkward tension, the unspoken prejudice, the wrongness of it all, but no one said a word. 10 minutes passed. Amanda finally picked up the phone, pretending to make a call. "Yes, hi," she said loudly, glancing toward Daniel. "There's someone here, claiming to have a meeting with Mr. Reynolds." No, I don't think so either." She shot Daniel a smirk. "Right, thank you." She hung up dramatically. "Looks like Mr. Reynolds isn't expecting anyone by that name." She smiled sweetly, like she'd just done the world a favor. "Maybe try checking with the mailroom next time." Daniel slowly rose to his feet. The entire lobby went still. He looked straight at her, his calm expression unwavering. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice low but steady. Amanda folded her arms, defensive now. "Positive." For a brief moment, the two locked eyes, her gaze full of arrogance, his full of quiet strength. Then Daniel exhaled softly and said, "All right, I'll wait a little longer." He sat back down, unbothered, unshaken. Amanda frowned, irritated that he didn't storm out or raise his voice. She muttered under her breath, "Unbelievable." Time ticked on. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and out stepped a man in a dark gray suit, flanked by two assistants. The moment he saw Daniel, his eyes lit up. "Mr. Carter," he called out, hurrying forward. "I'm so sorry to keep you waiting. We didn't expect you so early." The lobby froze. Amanda's face went pale. The man extended his hand eagerly, shaking Daniel's with both of his. "Welcome to Barton & Cole, sir. Everyone's been waiting upstairs. The board is ready for your presentation." Every eye turned to Amanda. Her breath caught in her throat. "Mr. Carter," she whispered. The man in the gray suit looked at her, confused. "Yes, our new CEO." The words hit her like thunder. Daniel gave a small, polite smile, the kind that carried the weight of everything she had just said and done. "Thank you," he said to the man. "And thank you," he added, turning to Amanda, "for the warm welcome." His tone wasn't cruel, but it made her flinch. He walked toward the elevator with the director, leaving behind a silence so deep it could be felt. Amanda stood motionless, heart pounding, her reflection in the shiny marble floor, looking smaller than she had ever felt. The whispers began immediately, low, sharp, and impossible to ignore. That's the new CEO. Someone murmured. Oh my God. She laughed at him. She called him a delivery guy. The sound of those whispers was worse than any scream. As the elevator doors closed, Daniel glanced at the floor one last time, where his reflection met hers from across the room. His expression was unreadable, but his silence spoke volumes about patience, dignity, and the cost of ignorance. The doors slid shut with a final, quiet ding. Amanda sank into her chair. The laughter she'd once used as a weapon, now echoing in her mind like a curse. The lobby returned to its rhythm. Phones ringing, heels tapping, people pretending not to have seen what just happened. But deep down, everyone knew they'd just witnessed something powerful. A moment that would ripple through that building long after the morning ended. And as Daniel ascended toward the top floor, toward the room where power truly sat, one thought lingered in his mind. Calm and unshakable. Sometimes, respect doesn't need to be demanded. It reveals itself when the truth finally walks through the door. The sound started as a chuckle, soft, dismissive, like the kind of laugh people use when they believe they're above you. But within seconds, it grew louder. Amanda leaned back in her chair, her laughter carrying across the marble lobby like an echo of arrogance. The sound made heads turn. A few people smiled awkwardly. Others looked away, pretending not to hear. But everyone felt it, that uncomfortable mix of amusement and shame that only comes when someone crosses the line. Daniel Carter didn't move. He stood there, calm, patient, a quiet force surrounded by noise. He looked at her the way one might look at a storm from behind a window, unmoved, unbothered, waiting for it to pass. Sir, Amanda said between laughs, I told you, this isn't the place for whatever it is you're doing here. Please don't make this difficult. Her tone sharpened. Security. She picked up the phone, pressing the button with exaggerated importance. Yeah, we've got someone loitering in the main lobby again. Her words cut through the space like shards of glass. Loitering. It wasn't the first time. Daniel had heard that word used to describe him, and it probably wouldn't be the last. Still, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself. Instead, he simply said, I have an appointment. His voice was low, but it carried, steady, clear, grounded. It silenced the few who had been whispering. Amanda froze for a brief second, surprised by how composed he was. But rather than stop, she smiled again, this time more smugly. Oh, of course you do, she said, sarcasm dripping from every word. And I suppose next you'll tell me you own the place. The room tensed. Even the background hum of computers seemed to fade. The security guard appeared from around the corner, tall and broad, his uniform crisp, his expression uncertain. He'd seen this kind of thing before. A power trip at the front desk, a misunderstanding that could turn ugly. Is there a problem here? He asked, his tone careful. Amanda jumped at the chance to assert control. Yes, she said quickly. This man is refusing to leave. He's claiming to have an appointment, but I've checked. There's no one by his name on the schedule. The guard's eyes shifted to Daniel. There was something in the man's posture that didn't fit the situation. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't defensive, and he wasn't acting like someone who didn't belong. He simply stood tall, with a kind of quiet authority that made the guard hesitate. Sir, the guard said politely, may I see your ID or invitation? Daniel reached into his pocket, slowly, deliberately, and handed over a sleek black card embossed with gold letters. The guard's eyes widened as he read it. Before he could say anything, Amanda snatched the card from his hand. What's this supposed to be? She said, examining it with a skeptical look. Her voice grew sharper, the mockery returning. Oh, this is cute. You even printed yourself a fancy card. That's dedication. She laughed again, but this time, no one joined in. The sound didn't echo the same way. It felt forced, uneasy. The guard cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said carefully, maybe you should. But Amanda waved him off. No, I've got it, she snapped. He's obviously confused. Maybe he's at the wrong building. She looked back at Daniel, her tone turning cruel. You people really should double-check where you're supposed to be before walking into places like this. That last line made the entire room stop breathing. You people. It was subtle enough for her to deny it later, but heavy enough that everyone heard what she meant. Daniel didn't react outwardly, but something behind his calm eyes shifted, a flicker of disappointment more powerful than anger. He met her gaze and said softly, I didn't realize kindness required a dress code. For the first time, Amanda's smile faltered. Something in the way he said it, measured, sincere, unshakable, made her blink. She glanced at the guard, but he was no longer looking at her. His eyes were on Daniel, respect quietly dawning in his expression. The lobby had fallen completely silent now, the laughter gone, replaced by a tension that buzzed like electricity. Daniel turned slightly, checking his watch. I'll wait, he said simply. His composure seemed to fill the room, making Amanda's arrogance shrink in its presence. She tried to recover, laughing again, but this time the sound cracked halfway through. Suit yourself, she muttered, sitting back down, pretending to type something on her screen. As Daniel took a seat near the window, the security guard leaned toward Amanda and whispered, maybe you should verify that appointment again. She rolled her eyes. There's no point, she said quietly. He's bluffing. but even as she said it, there was doubt in her voice. From his chair, Daniel could see the reflection of the entire lobby in the glass wall beside him. Amanda, the guard, the watching employees, all caught between curiosity and guilt. His face was calm, unreadable. He'd been in rooms like this before, judged before he spoke, dismissed before he was heard. But this time, he wasn't the one who should have been nervous. Minutes passed. The sound of clicking keyboards returned, the world pretending to move on. But beneath the surface, the air still hummed with what had just happened. Amanda avoided looking at him. Yet every few seconds, her eyes flickered toward his reflection, uneasy, haunted by the way he hadn't broken under her laughter. And then the phone rang. She jumped, startled by the sudden sound. The guard looked at her, his expression knowing. "Maybe you should get that," he said. She picked it up, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Front desk, Amanda speaking." The voice on the other end was brisk, professional, authoritative. "This is Mr. Reynolds," it said. "Has Mr. Carter arrived yet? The CEO's meeting starts soon." Amanda froze. The receiver slipped slightly in her hand. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Around her, the world seemed to stop. The same people who'd witnessed her laughter now turned to witness her silence. The security guard glanced at Daniel, who, without a word, rose from his seat, smoothed his shirt, and began walking toward the elevator. Every step echoed in the marble hall, replacing the laughter that once had. He stopped briefly in front of the desk and met Amanda's eyes one last time. "Thank you," he said softly, "for calling security." He stepped into the elevator, and as the doors slid shut, Amanda caught her own reflection, staring back at her, pale, shaken, and no longer laughing. The guard looked at her, sighed, and said quietly, "Guess he really did have an appointment." And in that echoing silence, Amanda realized that her laughter had done something she could never take back. It had revealed who she truly was, long before anyone else had to say it. The lobby hummed with a strange mix of tension and curiosity, that awkward silence people wear when something uncomfortable just happened. The receptionist, Amanda, leaned back in her chair, pretending to be busy on her computer, but the smirk on her face said everything she believed she'd done the right thing. Around her, quiet murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. Two employees standing near the coffee machine exchanged glances. "Who is he?" One whispered. "Probably here to drop off documents," said the other. "Or maybe he's one of those walk-ins trying to ask for a job without an appointment." Their words weren't filled with hate, but they carried something colder, the kind of quiet bias that doesn't shout, but seeps into every corner of a place that calls itself professional. The man stood calmly, leather folders still in hand, eyes drifting over the sleek marble floor and glass walls that reflected the morning sun. He didn't flinch, didn't argue. Every second of silence only made his stillness louder. Amanda, watching him through her glossy screen, couldn't help herself. Some people just don't get how business works, she muttered under her breath, loud enough for the clients at the waiting lounge to hear. A few forced a polite smile. Others pretended not to notice. But one older gentleman in a navy suit frowned, glancing at the man with curiosity, not mockery. Still, the whispers kept growing. A young intern texted another. "There's this guy at receptional looks totally out of place." Across the lobby, someone chuckled quietly, feeding off Amanda's confidence. To them, this wasn't cruelty, it was entertainment before a meeting. Yet beneath those polished smiles and professional tones, the truth was raw. They didn't even realize how quickly they had placed this man into a box, sealed it, and labeled it unimportant. Then, the elevator doors opened with a soft ding. Everyone turned instinctively, expecting someone important, an executive, a board member, maybe a VIP client. But when no one stepped out, attention returned to the man, still standing silently, eyes steady, face unreadable. His calmness began to unsettle even those who had laughed moments ago. Something about the way he carried himself, the poise, the patience, the quiet authority didn't match the image they had created in their minds. Amanda broke the silence again, her tone dripping with condescension. "Sir, I already told you if you're here for deliveries, you need to use the side entrance. This area is for clients and staff only." The man turned to her slowly, and for the first time, he spoke not loudly, not angrily, but with a voice so composed it silenced the room. "I told you," he said evenly, "I have an appointment." Those words, simple yet weighted, hung in the air. The receptionist blinked, momentarily thrown off. For a second, she almost doubted herself. But pride is louder than reason. She rolled her eyes, muttering, "Sure you do." The employees went back to pretending to work, though every ear was tuned toward the front desk. Amanda leaned toward a nearby colleague and whispered, "You'd think people would at least dress for the part if they want to impress management." Her friend giggled, not realizing that behind her, the security guard who had been standing by quietly was beginning to piece things together. He had seen this man before. Somewhere, important. Somewhere that didn't fit the story Amanda was trying to tell. But before he could speak, Amanda's voice sliced through again. "Look, sir, if you don't leave in the next minute, I'll have to ask security to escort you out." The man didn't move. He simply smiled, a small, knowing smile that didn't reach his eyes. The kind of smile that says, "You'll understand soon." That moment, the calm before revelation, was almost cinematic. The whispers faded, the laughter stilled, and even Amanda's confidence seemed to hesitate. And just then, the elevator doors opened again. This time, footsteps echoed down the polished floor. The sound was brisk, authoritative. Every head turned as a senior executive stepped out, eyes locking immediately on the man standing quietly near the reception desk. "Mr. Carter," the executive said, his tone respectful, almost relieved. Gasps followed. Amanda froze mid-breath, color draining from her face. The man she'd mocked wasn't lost. He wasn't a delivery man. He was someone she was supposed to greet with honor, but that realization, what it meant and what it would cost, was still a few seconds away. And in those seconds, the weight of every whispered judgment hung heavy in the air. The laughter that once filled the lobby now felt like a stain that could never be undone. As the executive approached, the man's calm expression didn't change. He simply turned toward Amanda, his eyes steady but unreadable, and said softly, "You may want to check my name on the appointment list." Then he followed the executive toward the glass doors leading to the upper offices. The silence that followed was deafening. The same people who had whispered moments ago now sat frozen in embarrassment, avoiding each other's gaze. Amanda's fingers trembled slightly over her keyboard. Her smirk was gone, replaced by a sinking feeling in her chest. She didn't yet know who he truly was, but she could feel it. The shift, the change in the air. Something told her that the laughter she had started was about to echo back at her, louder than she ever expected. And as the elevator doors closed behind the man, the only sound left in the lobby was the faint hum of regret, waiting for what would come next. The sound of the elevator's soft ding sliced through the thick silence of the lobby. A sound so ordinary, yet now heavy with tension. Every head turned. From behind the polished chrome doors stepped a small group of top executives, sharp suits, expensive watches, and anxious eyes. They spoke in hushed voices, their tones urgent, their pace brisk. "He's already here," one of them whispered, scanning the room. No one was supposed to know about this visit, another muttered. Amanda, the receptionist, straightened immediately in her chair, the color draining from her face. She adjusted her blazer, fixed her hair, and forced a professional smile, pretending she hadn't just been laughing at someone minutes earlier. The irony hung thick in the air, though she didn't sense it yet. The man, calm, composed, still seated near the corner, didn't move. His leather folder rested on his lap, one hand loosely placed over it, as though he had all the time in the world. His eyes followed the executive's quietly, observing. Then, he checked his watch. It wasn't an anxious gesture. It was deliberate, confident, the kind of movement that came from a person who didn't wait for others, but was instead waited for. Amanda glanced at him from the desk, her earlier arrogance replaced by confusion. Something about his silence unsettled her now. She could still hear her own laughter replaying in her mind, sharp, dismissive, cruel, and for the first time she began to wish she hadn't spoken so loudly. The security guard, who had been standing awkwardly by the entrance, shifted his stance. He'd seen this man before, somewhere important. He just couldn't place where. The executives huddled closer, whispering more urgently. "He said he'd arrive without notice," the tallest one murmured. "Wanted to see the company's true face before introducing himself." Another adjusted his tie nervously. "If he's already here, and we've made a bad first impression." His words trailed off as his eyes scanned the lobby. And then, for the briefest second, his gaze landed on the man in the corner. Something about that calm posture made him pause. "No," he whispered to himself, disbelief flickering across his face. Amanda caught the look and spoke quickly, trying to reassert her authority. "Excuse me, sir," she said to the tall executive. "Is everything all right? We've had a small misunderstanding here earlier. Some random visitor came in, said he had an appointment." She laughed lightly, trying to sound casual, but it came out strained. The executive's expression hardened. "What visitor?" She gestured subtly toward the man in the corner. "Him. He said he had a meeting, but there's nothing under his name in the system. Probably mixed up his days." The executive's brow furrowed. "And what's his name?" Amanda hesitated. "He didn't say. I didn't bother to ask." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the clicking of the wall clock seemed to grow louder. The executive's gaze didn't leave her face. Then, slowly, he turned toward the man in the corner. The man rose to his feet, tall, dignified, unbothered. He held the leather folder with a quiet certainty and began walking toward them, his footsteps echoing across the marble floor like steady drumbeats before a storm. The executives straightened instinctively, some exchanging uneasy glances. Amanda's pulse quickened. She forced a smile, trying to recover control. "Sir, as I said before, visitors need to." But before she could finish, the tall executive raised a hand sharply. "Don't," he said quietly. His tone wasn't harsh, it was warning. She froze, her words dying mid-sentence. The man stopped in front of the group, his calm eyes moving from face to face. The lobby, once filled with whispers and laughter, was now silent enough to hear the hum of the air conditioning. Every second, stretched, anticipation building like a drawn breath that refused to release. He looked at the tall executive and offered a small, polite nod, one of acknowledgement, not subservience. The executive immediately returned it with visible respect. That gesture alone made Amanda's stomach twist. Then, for the first time since he had entered the building, the man spoke again. "I see the company hasn't changed much," he said, his voice smooth but edged with quiet disappointment. "Still judging books by their covers." The words landed heavy, like a truth everyone had tried to ignore. A flicker of panic crossed Amanda's face, and one of the executives whispered, "Sir, please, perhaps we should move to your office." Amanda blinked. Office. The word rang in her mind like an alarm. Her throat went dry. Her mind scrambled for explanations that no longer made sense. She had called security on him, mocked him, laughed in his face, and now, the people she admired most were standing before him with nervous respect. The man glanced at his watch once more, then said quietly, "You're right. We should. I wouldn't want to delay my own meeting." Without another word, he began walking toward the elevator. The executives followed in silence, their movements quick and uneasy. Amanda's hand gripped the edge of the desk, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. As the elevator doors slid open, the man paused and turned slightly, his calm eyes meeting hers for a brief, piercing moment. "Next time," he said softly, "try greeting everyone with respect. You never know who's watching." The elevator doors closed behind him with a final, echoing ding. Amanda stood frozen, her breath shallow, her reflection trembling on the glossy marble counter. The whispers that had once filled the lobby were gone now, replaced by a heavy, unspoken truth that hung in the air like smoke, and somewhere above, behind those silver elevator doors, the truth of who he really was about to come to light. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and out stepped the man who, moments ago, had been the quiet stranger mocked in the lobby. Now, all eyes followed him as the executives hurried to match his pace. Their nervous smiles, straightened ties, and lowered voices made it clear, this was no ordinary guest. The once lively lobby fell eerily still, every conversation dissolving into an ocean of uneasy silence. The receptionist, Amanda, felt her pulse quicken as her mind raced to piece together what was happening. Something about the way the executives addressed him, the way they stood, it was reverence, respect, fear. The tall executive stepped forward first, his voice trembling slightly. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," he said, his tone polished but anxious. The words echoed through the marble hall, heavy as thunder. Amanda froze. Mr. Carter. The name hit her like a cold wave. That name was on every company email, every executive memo, every motivational banner. Daniel Carter, the new CEO, the man she had mocked, doubted, and humiliated, was the very person who now owned the company she worked for. Her painted smile faltered, fading into disbelief. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted papers that didn't need adjusting, trying to look busy, invisible, anything but guilty. Whispers rippled across the lobby like wildfire. "That's him," someone gasped. "He's the CEO." Another whispered back. Phones discreetly lowered, eyes widened, and the same people who'd chuckled along moments ago now stared in silence, their faces drained of color. Daniel Carter turned to the executives, his calm demeanor unbroken. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice composed but with a subtle authority that filled the entire space. "Let's begin the meeting in the boardroom." The executives nodded quickly, stepping aside to guide him toward the glass conference room just beyond the lobby. As he passed Amanda's desk, he didn't even glance her way, and somehow, that silent disregard hurt more than anger ever could. Amanda's throat tightened. Her earlier laughter replayed in her mind. That smug tone, those cruel words, "Are you sure you're in the right place? Deliveries go through the back." Each one now cut into her like a blade. She wanted to disappear, to undo the last 10 minutes of her life. But reality didn't pause for regret. The man she had mocked was now walking into his first meeting as her ultimate boss. Inside the glass-walled boardroom, Daniel stood at the head of the table. The executives seated themselves carefully, like students before a strict teacher. The tension was thick, every breath measured, every movement deliberate. Daniel placed his folder on the table, opened it, and looked up. "Before we begin," he said slowly, "I'd like to address something important." His voice was calm, but the weight behind it made the air feel heavier. Outside, through the glass, Amanda could see everything. She wasn't supposed to watch, but her eyes wouldn't leave him. Daniel continued. "This morning, I entered this building without announcing myself. I wanted to see how people here treat others, especially those they think are beneath them." He paused, letting the words sink in. No one dared to move, and what I saw, he said softly, was disappointing. A few executives exchanged nervous glances. The receptionist, visible from where he stood, looked pale as a ghost. Daniel's gaze shifted toward the glass wall for a brief moment, not directly at Amanda, but close enough that she felt the sting of being seen. "Respect," he said, turning back to his staff, "is not something you give based on appearance, title, or skin color. It's something you give because it defines who you are." His voice, calm, yet cutting, reverberated through the room. "And if that value is missing here, then no amount of profits or prestige will save this company." One of the senior managers cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Carter, I assure you, this kind of behavior is not reflective of our. Daniel raised his hand slightly, silencing him. I don't need assurances, he said evenly. I need accountability. His gaze hardened. The culture here starts today, right now. And that means no one, is above basic human decency. Amanda could barely breathe. Her hands clutched the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. She knew this wasn't just a speech, it was judgment, and she was at the center of it. Every second of her earlier arrogance now burned in her chest. She wanted to run, to cry, to apologize, but her feet wouldn't move. Inside the meeting, Daniel finally sat down. Now, he said, his voice softening slightly, let's get to work. The executives nodded rapidly, scrambling to open their laptops and take notes. But the message had already been delivered, and it was one they would never forget. As the boardroom discussion began, Amanda turned away, staring at the elevator doors that had brought him here. The same elevator she had thought would carry him out. She could still hear the echoes of her laughter that now felt like a curse. Around her, the lobby remained silent, filled with uneasy stares and whispered guilt. Then, through the glass, Daniel spoke again, his voice firm but calm. By the end of today, he said, I want a full report on hiring standards, diversity training, and workplace conduct. We're not just changing numbers, we're changing values. His words rolled through the air, clear and decisive. Amanda knew, deep down, that this change was going to start with her, and as Daniel's reflection flickered against the glass wall, the same man she had mocked for being out of place, she realized just how small her laughter really was compared to the gravity of his silence. Outside, the clock ticked toward noon, but time felt suspended. The meeting inside was about to reshape the entire company, and for one woman at the front desk, it was the longest morning of her life. The moment hung in the air like a fragile thread ready to snap. The bustling lobby, once filled with chatter and the rhythmic tapping of heels, now stood in absolute silence. The receptionist's laughter, the same cruel, dismissive sound that echoed just minutes ago, was gone. All that remained was the sound of her shaky breathing. Her face, once painted with arrogance, drained of color as realization crashed over her. The man she mocked wasn't a visitor. He wasn't lost. He was the CEO. Her lips parted, words stumbling out like broken glass. And Mr. Carter. I didn't know. The man she had belittled slowly turned toward her. His eyes held no anger, no raised voice, just a quiet power that filled the space more than shouting ever could. That's usually how it happens, he said softly, almost to himself. People only find their manners when they realize someone matters to them. Every head in the lobby turned toward them. Phones were lowered. Conversations ceased. Even the security guards, who had earlier stood by, frozen, now shifted uneasily. The receptionist's trembling hands gripped the edge of her desk. Her voice quivered, desperate to salvage what little dignity remained. Please, sir, I didn't mean any harm. I thought you were. He cut her off gently but firmly. You thought I was less. His words were calm, but each syllable landed like a hammer. You thought I wasn't worth your respect. Tears welled in her eyes. The marble floor beneath her seemed to tilt, her world spinning, out of control. I was having a bad morning. She tried again, but the CEO raised a hand, silencing her instantly. Bad mornings don't create bad people, he said, but they reveal them. His gaze didn't waver. It wasn't cruel, it was reflective, almost saddened by what he saw. The executives behind him stood silently, heads lowered, aware that this was more than a personal confrontation. It was a moment about principle, about values. The receptionist's knees felt weak. Her voice broke. Please, sir, I can change. I'll do better. He took a slow step closer, his polished shoes echoing across the marble. The entire lobby could hear their own heartbeats now. You know, he said thoughtfully, my mother used to tell me something. She said, character isn't how you treat your boss. It's how you treat the janitor. Her tears finally fell. She tried to look away, but his words kept her rooted in place, the weight of shame pressing her down. He sighed softly, then spoke again. When I came in this morning, I wasn't here to test anyone. I was here to start a new chapter for this company, one built on respect, equality, and dignity. But instead, he paused, scanning the room. I found the same small-mindedness we've been trying to erase. Murmurs rippled through the employees nearby. Some looked at the floor. Others stared at him in awe. It wasn't just a reprimand, it was a wake-up call for everyone watching. The receptionist covered her mouth, sobbing quietly, Please, Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry. He looked at her, his tone softening, but never losing authority. Apologies are easy when the world is watching. But change, he said, letting the word linger. Change happens when no one is. A long pause filled the lobby. It was the kind of silence that felt like a lesson. Finally, he turned toward the head of HR standing nearby. Take care of this situation appropriately, he instructed, his voice steady. Final, no one should ever feel small in this building again. The HR manager nodded, understanding the depth of his meaning. The receptionist's sobs grew faint, replaced by the heavy sound of regret. Mr. Carter, adjusted his cufflinks and glanced around the lobby, the same space where just minutes ago he had been treated like an outsider. Now, every pair of eyes followed him, filled with both respect and reflection. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply walked toward the elevator, his posture calm, his expression unreadable. As the elevator doors opened, he paused and looked back, not at the receptionist, but at the entire lobby. How you treat people you think are beneath you, he said quietly, says everything about who you are. The doors slid shut. The silence that followed was deafening. Some employees exchanged glances, others whispered, but most simply stood there, absorbing the truth of what they'd witnessed. The receptionist sank into her chair, her reflection trembling in the polished desk surface. The echo of his words lingered, heavier than any punishment. It wasn't just her reputation that crumbled that day. It was the illusion that kindness depended on status. And as the elevator ascended, taking Mr. Carter to the top floor, one thing became clear to everyone left in that lobby: the laughter was gone, replaced by respect. The elevator doors slid open to the top floor, revealing a sleek corridor lined with glass walls and framed visions of success. The morning light poured in, bathing everything in gold. But inside the conference room, the air was heavier, charged with the weight of what had just happened downstairs. Mr. Carter stepped in, his presence commanding without effort. The senior executives were already seated, their expressions a mix of admiration and unease. Laptops closed as he entered. Conversations died instantly. The sound of his footsteps echoed like a steady drumbeat, calm, deliberate, full of purpose. "Good morning," he said, his tone even. He didn't raise his voice, but everyone leaned in. "Let's begin." He took his seat at the head of the table. For a moment, silence lingered, the kind that follows a storm. When everyone waits to see what comes next, Carter's eyes moved slowly around the room. "What happened downstairs," he began, "isn't just about one person's behavior. It's about our culture. It's about what we've allowed to grow when we weren't paying attention." A nervous shuffle went around the table. One executive cleared his throat but said nothing. "I built my career," Carter continued, "on the idea that respect isn't earned by titles, it's given by character. You don't treat people differently because of what they wear or where they come from. You treat them with dignity because that's what makes you human." He leaned forward, fingers clasped together. But clearly, somewhere along the way, that message got lost here. The room fell silent again. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade. Then, one of the senior managers, a woman named Linda, spoke softly. "Sir, what happened this morning? It shocked everyone. But maybe it's also a wake-up call. A reminder." Carter nodded slowly. "A reminder, yes. But not just for the staff." He looked directly at the leadership team. "For all of us." He stood and walked toward the large window, overlooking the city, towers of glass and steel stretching endlessly into the horizon. "You know," he said after a moment, his voice softer now, "when I was younger, I used to walk into offices just like this. But no one looked at me twice. They assumed I didn't belong. Some laughed. Some ignored me. But I never forgot how that felt, to be invisible." He turned back toward them, his expression calm but resolute. "That feeling of being dismissed before being known shaped me. It taught me that success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about building a place where no one else has to go through that." A hush settled over the table. Some executives lowered their gaze. Others nodded subtly, not out of obligation, but understanding. Meanwhile, in another corner of the building, behind another closed door, the HR department was already at work. Files opened. Emails scrolled. Whispered voices carried across cubicles. The receptionist's name appeared at the top of a list, highlighted, underlined. Her personnel record told a story she'd never admit aloud. Notes about attitude, concerns, complaints from visitors, mentions of unprofessional tone. Each report small enough to ignore on its own. But together, they painted a pattern. One HR associate looked up from the file and exhaled quietly. "This isn't the first time," she said. "We've had multiple incidents. Looks like this one finally caught up to her." Her supervisor nodded, eyes narrowing as he clicked through more documents. "It's always the same," he murmured. "People forget that, how they treat others, especially when they think no one's watching, always comes back around." Back in the conference room, Carter's tone shifted from reflection to resolve. "Starting today," he said, "we rebuild this company's culture from the inside out. Respect and empathy will no longer be just slogans on a wall, they'll be measured in how we act." He gestured toward the HR director sitting near the end of the table. "We're introducing new leadership training. I want workshops, accountability programs, and anonymous feedback channels. And most importantly," he paused, meeting every gaze, "I want people to feel safe. No one should ever hesitate to speak up." The HR director nodded, already taking notes. "Understood, sir. We'll start immediately." "Good," Carter said. His expression softened just slightly. "Because if we don't take care of the people who walk through our doors from the janitor to the VP, then everything else we build will crumble." The executives exchanged glances, nodding, some visibly moved. For the first time that morning, there was not fear in the room, but respect. As the meeting continued, the camera of this unseen cinematic moment would drift from the glass-walled conference room to the HR office again, where the receptionist now sat, eyes red, hands shaking as she stared at her termination letter. She wasn't angry, not anymore, just hollow. The laughter that once defined her had vanished, replaced by the echo of her own regret. Through the glass, she could see employees passing by, some whispering, some pretending not to notice. The same people she had once dismissed now avoided her gaze. The irony was cruel, but it was also fair. Back upstairs, Carter finished his address with one final thought. If today teaches us anything, he said quietly, it's that kindness is power, and power without kindness is just fear. He looked around the room one last time. Let's lead with something better. As the executives rose from their seats, the city outside gleamed, a symbol of ambition and opportunity. But inside those walls, something had shifted. It wasn't just a new policy being written. It was a new beginning. Carter lingered for a moment longer, staring out the window. The reflection staring back at him wasn't just a CEO, it was a man who turned his pain into purpose. Then, with quiet determination, he turned toward the door. We've got work to do, he said simply, and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and for the first time in a long time, the silence that followed didn't feel heavy. It felt like change. The knock on the glass door was soft, but it carried the weight of inevitability. The receptionist winced, radiant with confidence, frozen behind her desk, eyes fixed on the HR manager standing in the hallway. Can you come with me, please? The woman said quietly. No sharpness, no anger, just calm authority. The receptionist's throat tightened. She managed a small nod, pushing her chair back, the sound of its wheels echoing through the silent lobby. The same people who had once watched her laugh now turned away, pretending to work. The pride she wore like perfume that morning had faded into something hollow and cold. She followed the HR manager down the hall, every step heavier than the last. The walls felt narrower, the fluorescent lights harsher. At the end of the corridor, a door marked Human Resources, Private, stood waiting, and behind it, her reckoning. When the door closed, the sound sealed her fate. Inside, two people sat at the table, the HR director and, unexpectedly, Mr. Carter himself. The CEO's expression was calm, unreadable, but his silence said more than any scolding ever could. The receptionist's hands trembled as she took a seat. I just want to say, I didn't know. Carter raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. That's exactly the point, he said softly. You didn't know, and yet, you decided what kind of person I was anyway. Her eyes filled instantly. I never meant to hurt anyone, he interrupted, his voice low, steady, and heartbreakingly calm. You didn't have to mean it, you just had to do it. The HR director opened a file. Inside, a stack of printed complaints, time-stamped and signed. We've received multiple reports about your conduct over the past year, she said. Comments toward visitors, disrespect to junior staff, and today's incident, well, it only confirmed a pattern. The receptionist looked at the papers as if they were burning her. Her fingers twisted together nervously. I was just doing my job, she whispered. Your job, Carter replied, leaning forward slightly, is to represent this company's values, to make people feel welcome when they walk through those doors. You didn't do that? Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and hot. She wiped them quickly, trying to find her voice. I was having a bad day, she stammered. I didn't mean to laugh. I just thought. He looked at her, eyes steady but not cruel. You thought I didn't belong. She lowered her gaze, unable to deny it. The room went still again. The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence, each second cutting deeper. Carter finally sighed, the weight of disappointment in every breath. Do you know the difference between a mistake and a choice? He asked quietly. A mistake happens once. A choice repeats itself until it becomes a habit. The HR director folded her hands. We're terminating your employment, effective immediately, she said gently. You'll receive your final check by the end of the week. For a moment, the receptionist didn't move. She just stared at the table, her reflection warped in the polished surface. The laughter that had once filled the lobby now echoed only in her memory, taunting her. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. I never thought it would end like this. Carter stood, buttoning his jacket. Most people don't, he said quietly, but endings like this, they're lessons, if you choose to see them. She looked up at him through blurred eyes. Are you angry with me? He paused, then shook his head. No, he said softly, just disappointed. Because you had a chance to make people's days better, and you chose to make them smaller. Those words hit harder than any reprimand ever could. The HR director slid a white envelope. Across the table, her termination letter. She stared at it for a long time before finally picking it up. Her hand trembled as she placed it into her bag. I understand, she whispered. Carter's gaze softened, but his tone remained firm. I don't take joy in this. I don't want revenge. I just want to make sure this company reflects the respect every person deserves, no matter how they look or where they come from. She nodded faintly, tears falling freely now. I wish I'd realized that sooner. Realizing it now, he said, is the first step to being better. The next step is what you do after you walk out that door. There was no malice in his voice, only truth. As she stood to leave, she hesitated at the door, glancing back one last time. The CEO was already gathering his notes, his demeanor steady, composed, the kind of strength born not from ego, but from grace. Outside, the hallway seemed longer than before, the light too bright, the world too quiet. She passed by the lobby where her laughter had once rung out, and for the first time, she understood what silence really felt like, the kind that doesn't comfort, but corrects. Employees watched from their desks as she walked toward the exit. Some looked sympathetic, others indifferent, but no one spoke. The only sound was the faint click of her heels, each step marking the end of something she'd taken for granted. When she reached the glass doors, she turned slightly, looking back at the building, the place she thought she owned, but never truly respected. Behind her, up in his office, Carter stood at the window, watching her leave. There was no pride in his eyes, no triumph, just reflection. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "Some lessons cost us our comfort," he murmured. "Others cost us our place." He turned away from the window and back toward his desk, where a framed quote sat, "Character is how you treat those who can do nothing for you." He straightened it gently, then sat down, the city humming quietly outside his window. Down below, the receptionist stepped into the sunlight. The world moved on, cars honking, people walking, life continuing as if nothing had happened. But for her, everything had changed. Sometimes, reckoning doesn't come as thunder or fury. Sometimes, it comes as a quiet room, a calm voice, and the realization that kindness was the only thing you ever truly needed to keep your job and your dignity. And as the doors closed behind her for the last time, her laughter was gone, replaced by the sound of humility finally found. Change doesn't happen overnight, but in the weeks that followed, it began to take shape, like sunlight slowly breaking through after a storm. The same building that once carried whispers of judgment now echoed with a new kind of energy. The air felt lighter, the smiles more genuine. It wasn't just about a man becoming CEO. It was about an entire company rediscovering its heart. Mr. Carter's leadership wasn't loud or boastful. He didn't rule from the top floor, separated by glass and titles. Instead, he walked among his people. He greeted janitors by name. He paused to ask interns how they were adjusting. When people saw him in the hallway, they didn't stiffen out of fear, they straightened out of pride. Something in the atmosphere had changed. A month after the incident, Carter held an all-staff meeting in the auditorium, the largest the company had ever hosted. The seats filled quickly, employees murmuring with curiosity. Some wondered if it would be a strict corporate lecture. Instead, when the lights dimmed and Carter stepped up to the stage, what they heard was something very different. "I want to talk about respect," he began, his voice calm but powerful, the kind that carried to every corner of the room. Not the kind that's written in handbooks, but the kind that lives in our daily choices. The way we treat the people who can't do anything for us. That's the measure of who we are. A hush fell over the crowd. Even those who hadn't witnessed what happened in the lobby weeks ago knew what he was referring to. Carter continued, pacing slowly. "This company will not be known for how big our numbers are, but for how big our hearts can be. Because if we lose empathy, we lose everything that truly matters." The audience didn't clap right away. They were processing. It wasn't just a speech. It was a mirror held up to everyone in that room. And for the first time, people weren't looking at their CEO with distance. They were looking at him with admiration. In the following days, Carter introduced new initiatives, ones that went beyond surface-level changes. He launched diversity and empathy workshops, led not by consultants, but by employees themselves sharing their own stories. The conference rooms that once held tense meetings now became safe spaces for conversation. People spoke about their experiences, the biases they'd faced, the assumptions they'd made, and the lessons they'd learned. Tears were shed, hands were shaken, and something powerful began to heal. Next came the open-door policy. Carter's office door, the one that previous CEOs had kept firmly shut, now stayed open almost every day. Anyone, from an intern to a department head, could walk in. Sometimes it was to discuss a project, other times just to talk. He made time for both. One afternoon, a young woman from accounting nervously entered his office. "Sir," she said softly, "I just wanted to say thank you." People are smiling again. It feels different here. Carter smiled, leaning back in his chair. "That's not me," he said. "That's all of you choosing to be better." Word of the transformation spread beyond the company walls. Job applicants began mentioning the culture shift in their interviews. Clients noticed the difference to how the employees worked with more confidence, more unity. Even longtime staff who once felt invisible were starting to shine. In the cafeteria, laughter replaced the old hierarchy of who sat where. Teams mixed more freely. Conversations were no longer filtered through fear of judgment. And on the wall near the reception desk, the very place where everything had begun, hung a new framed poster with bold letters. "Respect is not earned by position, it's shown by action." Every person who walked in saw it. Every receptionist, every visitor, every new hire. It wasn't just decoration, it was a reminder. Meanwhile, in HR, A quiet but important project was underway. The department, under Carter's direction, reviewed company policies, ensuring fairness and inclusivity were built into every layer. There would be no tolerance for discrimination, subtle or overt, not because it looked good on paper, but because it was right. One morning, Carter gathered a small group of senior executives for coffee in the lounge. They talked not about profits or quarterly goals, but about purpose. "We used to lead by fear," one of them admitted. "Now people follow because they believe." Carter smiled faintly. "That's the real growth," he said. "Numbers can rise and fall, but belief, once planted, keeps growing." Outside his office, life carried on, busier than ever, yet calmer somehow. The receptionist desk was now manned by a new hire, a young man who greeted everyone with warmth and patience. He didn't know all the details of what had happened before his time, but he felt the weight of that space and the opportunity it symbolized. And when Carter passed by, the young receptionist always stood up and said, "Good morning, Mr. Carter." Every time, the CEO would pause, return the smile, and reply, "Good morning. How's your day going?" It was a small exchange, but it carried the power of everything that had changed. Proof that respect wasn't just preached, it was practiced. Weeks turned into months, and the transformation became part of the company's DNA. The media caught wind of it, publishing a feature about the CEO who changed culture through kindness. But Carter didn't care about headlines. He cared about moments, the way people looked at each other differently now, the way empathy had become the heartbeat of the company. On a quiet Friday evening, as the office lights dimmed and employees packed up for the weekend, Carter stood once more in the lobby. He looked around at the space that had witnessed humiliation, revelation, and now, redemption. He exhaled deeply, a soft smile crossing his face. The laughter that once stung had long since faded, replaced by something stronger, purpose. "Maybe," he whispered to himself, "this is what real success feels like." He turned toward the doors, the city lights reflecting in the glass, not as a man who had proven himself, but as one who had reminded everyone else what being human truly means. And with that, he stepped out into the night, leaving behind not just a company transformed, but a legacy built on respect. The morning light spilled across the polished floors of the company lobby, the same place where everything had once gone wrong. Now, it gleamed like a new beginning. The scent of fresh coffee floated through the air, mingling with the quiet hum of conversation. People walked with ease, smiling, greeting each other, but one man stood silently near the glass doors, lost in thought. It was Mr. Carter, the CEO. Weeks had passed since the incident that changed everything. The company had found its new rhythm, its new heart. But for Carter, one question lingered. What became of her? The receptionist who once laughed at him, the one who lost her job that day, he hadn't seen her since, and though he knew her actions had consequences, a part of him hoped she had learned, grown, and healed. That thought stayed with him, not as bitterness, but as reflection. He believed every person carried the capacity to change. He knew that anger might win a moment, but compassion could change a life. Later that day, Carter stood at the edge of the conference hall, watching his employees gather for the quarterly meeting. The room was full, nearly every seat taken. The company was thriving, not just in numbers, but in spirit. He could see it in their eyes, pride, empathy, and a shared understanding that they were part of something bigger than themselves. As the lights dimmed and the murmurs settled, Carter walked to the stage. No music played this time, no grand entrance, just the soft echo of his footsteps. He adjusted the microphone, glanced at the faces before him, and began. "Months ago," he said, his tone calm but heavy with meaning, "something happened in this building that changed us all. It started as an uncomfortable moment, one I wouldn't wish on anyone, but it became a turning point." He paused. The audience leaned in, remembering. "It reminded me how easy it is to judge people before we know their story, how easy it is to laugh, to assume, to label. But it also reminded me of something greater, that we can choose to be better, that we can build a world where respect isn't earned through status, but shown through kindness." His voice carried warmth, yet there was gravity beneath it. "The woman who laughed that day made a mistake. But let me be clear, we all have moments we wish we could take back. The question isn't whether we fall, it's whether we rise with humility." There was a silence that filled the room, the kind that hums when words sink deep into people's hearts. Carter continued, "I didn't fire her because I wanted revenge. I made that decision because the company needed to learn, and she needed a chance to reflect. My hope, truly, is that wherever she is now, she's found her strength, her empathy, her growth." He looked out over the crowd, the lights glinting softly against his eyes. "Because the greatest punishment isn't losing a job, it's realizing too late the person you could have been." The audience sat frozen, every word pressing deeper into their conscience. And then Carter said the line that would be remembered long after he left that stage. He leaned closer to the microphone, voice low but resonant. "Never laugh at someone walking through your doors. You never know who they are or who they'll become." The room went silent. No applause, no murmurs, just the quiet echo of a truth too powerful to interrupt. For a long moment, all you could hear was the faint hum of the air vents and the sound of reflection. hundreds of hearts absorbing the weight of a single sentence. Then, slowly, people began to clap. Not the thunderous applause of excitement, but the steady, heartfelt rhythm of respect. It grew from a few hands to the entire room until it filled the space with something almost sacred. Carter smiled faintly. Not the smile of victory, but of peace. He stepped away from the microphone and nodded once before walking off the stage. He didn't need to say anything more. His message had already taken root. Outside, as the meeting ended, employees gathered in small groups, speaking in soft voices. "He's right," someone said. "We never really know anyone's story." Another nodded, glancing toward the lobby. "That line? It'll stay with me forever." Meanwhile, Carter made his way to his office. As he entered, sunlight bathed his desk in gold. A single envelope lay waiting, unmarked, except for his name written neatly across the front. Curious, he opened it. Inside was a short note. No name, just a few simple words in careful handwriting. "Thank you for the lesson I didn't know I needed. I've started over, humbler, stronger, kinder. I'll never forget." Carter read it twice, then smiled softly. He didn't need to know who it was from. He already knew. He set the note gently in his drawer, beside the company's first employee badge, a reminder of how far they had all come. Then, turning toward the window, he looked out over the city, alive, endless, full of people with unseen stories. He whispered quietly to himself, "If we lead with kindness, the world changes in ways we'll never fully see." The camera of the mind pans out, the skyline glowing under the setting sun. The company stands tall, not as a monument of wealth, but as a symbol of what respect can build. And as the light fades, one truth lingers like the echo of his words. The lesson lives on. The world had moved on, but the lesson still lingered, quiet, powerful, unforgettable. It had been several months since that morning when laughter in the lobby turned into a moment of awakening. The company was thriving, its people walking taller, speaking kinder, carrying the weight of a truth they had learned the hard way. Yet far beyond those glass walls, in a smaller, humbler office on the outskirts of the city, another story was unfolding, one of reflection, humility, and redemption. The camera of the mind opens on a woman sitting at her desk. The same woman whose laughter once echoed through that marble lobby. The receptionist, Melissa. Her hair was tied back neatly, her desk organized, but her eyes told a different story. Softer now, older in wisdom, if not in years. The arrogance that once lived behind her smirk had faded, replaced by something gentler, gratitude. She looked around the small office. No grand windows, no gold logos on the wall. Just honest work, good people, and peace she hadn't felt in a long time. For months, she had carried the weight of what she'd done, the embarrassment, the regret, the face of the man she mocked. But instead of letting it crush her, she'd let it teach her. That morning, she took out a pen and a plain white envelope. The company name she was writing to, his company, still made her heart race. Her hand trembled slightly as she began. "Dear Mr. Carter," she wrote, "I don't expect you to remember me kindly, but I've remembered you every day since that morning." Her handwriting was careful, steady, as if she was trying to pour her truth between every line. "At first, I was angry, not at you, but at myself, though I didn't want to admit it. I blamed the system, the rules, the bad day I was having, anything to avoid facing what I had become, someone who judged people by appearances. You didn't have to say much that day for me to see myself clearly for the first time. It was painful, but it was necessary." She paused, took a deep breath, then continued. "I work now at a small firm. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. Every person who walks through that door, I greet them with respect, no matter who they are. Because of you, I learned that kindness is never a weakness, it's the highest form of strength." Her pen slowed as she neared the end. "Thank you for teaching me a lesson I'll never forget. You didn't humiliate me when you could have. You gave me the chance to grow. I'm sorry for my behavior. Truly, and I hope that one day, I can prove that the person you saw that morning isn't the person I've become." She signed it simply, with gratitude. "Melissa." She folded the letter carefully, slid it into the envelope, and sealed it shut. Then she sat there for a long moment, staring at it. It felt like more than paper, it felt like release. Then she stood, walked to the mail slot by the office door, and let it fall through. As the envelope disappeared, so did a piece of her old self. Days later, miles away, Mr. Carter sat in his office, sunlight streaming across his desk. The day had been long, meetings, reports, decisions. He rubbed his temples when his assistant knocked lightly. "Sir, a letter for you," she said, placing a plain envelope in his hand. No logo, no sender name, just his written neatly across the front. Curious, he opened it. As he began to read, the noise of the world around him faded away. The sound of traffic below, the clicking of keyboards outside, gone. There was only the voice of that letter, humble and sincere. When he reached the words, "You gave me the chance to grow," he stopped. His lips curved into a faint, reflective smile. For a moment, he leaned back in his chair and stared out the window. The city glinting in the afternoon light. He whispered softly to himself, "That's what leadership is supposed to do." He folded the letter with care, the same way someone might handle something fragile and valuable. Then he opened the drawer of his desk, the same one that held the first note she'd sent months ago, and placed this new one beside it. He sat there quietly, thinking about how easy it would have been to act out of anger, to make an example of her. But that day, he had chosen patience over pride, and now, that choice had come full circle. He looked toward the photograph on his desk, a picture of his younger self. Years ago, standing in front of the small store where he'd first worked. Back then, people used to look at him the same way Melissa once had, dismissive, uninterested, assuming he didn't belong. That memory had shaped the man he became, and now, it had shaped someone else too. Outside his window, the city moved with purpose. People walking, talking, living their stories. Carter smiled faintly and said under his breath, "Respect. It's such a small thing, yet it changes everything." The camera fades slowly as he leans back, peace settling in his expression. The world outside keeps turning, but for him, this moment is still quiet and complete, because true leadership, he knew, wasn't about power, wealth, or revenge. It was about transformation in others and within ourselves. And, as the music swells and the scene fades to black, one final line echoes through the air, the heartbeat of the story itself. The power of respect isn't in demanding it, it's in giving it first.